He boarded the plane with a first-class ticket, but was told that seat's not for people like you. 30 minutes later, the crew was fired. What this black CEO did next shocked the entire airline. Back in Index Pointing Right, this is Moral Mirror. Subscribe for real stories with powerful lessons. Speech Balloon, what would you do if this happened to you? Comment below. It was a calm Monday morning at JFK Airport, one of the busiest in the world. People in suits rushed from terminal to terminal, coffee cups in hand, dragging carry-ons behind them. But in the middle of that crowd stood a man who didn't need to rush, David Lawson. David wasn't your average traveler. He was the CEO of a billion-dollar tech company, recently featured on the cover of Forbes under top black CEOs shaping the future. He had built his business from scratch, starting with just one laptop in a shared apartment. Today, he was heading to San Francisco to finalize a multi-million-dollar acquisition, the biggest deal of his career. Dressed in a custom navy suit, polished shoes, and carrying a sleek black briefcase, David walked confidently through the terminal. He had a first-class ticket in his hand, seat 1A, right at the front. Not because he wanted luxury, but because that was the only way to relax for the long 5-hour flight ahead. After all, he'd be stepping off the plane straight into a high-stakes boardroom meeting. As he approached the gate, he noticed something strange. The gate agent looked at him for a moment too long. She gave a polite but forced smile and said, "Sir, this line is for first-class passengers only." David smiled back, handing over his ticket. "I know. That's me." The agent stared at the boarding pass, then at David again. There was hesitation in her eyes. She looked him up and down, not with admiration, but confusion, like something didn't quite add up. After scanning the pass, she mumbled, "Okay, you can proceed," and quickly looked away. David didn't say anything. He'd seen this kind of thing before. The surprise on people's faces when a black man in designer clothes walks into a space they didn't expect to see him in. But he didn't let it bother him. He had work to do. As he stepped on a plane, he was greeted by a young flight attendant. She smiled at the passengers ahead of him, but when David approached, her smile faded. "Sir," she said, blocking his path gently with her arm, "economy is just down that way." David was confused. "I'm in seat 1A, he said, showing his ticket. The flight attendant looked at the ticket, then glanced quickly toward 1A. A white man in a golf shirt and khakis was already settling into that seat, sipping a glass of orange juice. "There must be a mistake," she said quickly. "That seat is already taken." David remained calm. "Can you double-check the manifest?" But instead of checking, the attendant leaned in slightly and said in a lower voice, "Sir, please don't make a scene. Just take another seat in economy and we'll sort it out later." Passengers nearby started to look up from their phones. A few raised eyebrows. One woman whispered to her husband, "Wasn't that his seat?" David knew exactly what was happening. He wasn't being denied his seat because of a booking error. He was being denied because someone had decided, consciously or unconsciously, that he didn't belong in first class. And the worst part? He wasn't even surprised. He paused for a second. He could have argued. He could have pulled up emails, confirmation codes, or raised his voice. But instead, he did something unexpected. He calmly said, "No worries," turned around, and walked off the plane. The crew seemed relieved. One of them even said, "Thank you for understanding." But they had no idea who they had just brushed off. David Lawson walked off the plane, silent, calm, but not defeated. People on the flight were still murmuring, whispering things like, "Wasn't that his seat? Why'd he leave? Did he get bumped?" The truth was far worse than a simple mix-up. As he stepped back into the boarding tunnel, the sound of the door sealing behind him echoed louder than any words spoken on that plane. That sound? It wasn't just a door closing, it was a line being crossed. David found a nearby bench in the terminal, sat down slowly, and took a deep breath. Not out of anger, but strategy. He was used to pressure, used to people underestimating him. What the airline crew didn't realize was, he wasn't just a passenger. He was a partner. Here's what they didn't know. David's tech company provided cybersecurity infrastructure for 3 of the country's major airlines, including the very airline he had just been kicked off of. His company didn't just protect customer data. They helped prevent hacking attempts, managed airport server security, and consulted directly with airline executives. He didn't just fly first class. He sat at the table where decisions were made. Still seated at the terminal, David opened his phone and called his executive assistant. "Sarah, get me on the line with Delta's corporate security VP. Now." Within minutes, he was on a secure Zoom call. Not with a customer service rep, not with a supervisor, but with one of the top-ranking executives in the company. "David, what's going on?" asked the VP, confused. David leaned forward. "I just boarded Flight 227 to San Francisco. Had a confirmed seat in 1A. First class. I was stopped, questioned, and eventually pushed off the plane, with no apology and no attempt to verify my seat." The VP looked stunned. "That can't be right." "Oh, but it is. And just so you know, this isn't the first time it's happened. But it's the last time it's happening to me." The executive scrambled. "I'll have someone look into this immediately. I can get you on a private flight." David raised a hand. "That won't be necessary. I'll book my own jet, but you'll be getting a formal letter from my legal team. And I expect a full internal review with consequences." What happened next shocked even him. Meanwhile, back on the plane, something unexpected started happening. A woman in business class had recorded part of the interaction on her phone. She posted it to social media with the caption, "Black man with a first-class ticket kicked off a Delta flight." No explanation, just silence. Hashtag flying while black. The post went viral within 20 minutes. People began resharing it, tagging news channels, and calling out the airline for racial profiling. Hashtags like hashtag boycott Delta and hashtag first class while black started trending on X, formerly Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. David didn't even have to say a word online. The internet was doing it for him. He finally stood up, gathered his things, and left the terminal. As he passed the same gate he had been turned away from, the same agent avoided eye contact. But it was too late. The wheels were already in motion. Back at airline headquarters, the executive team was in crisis mode. The story had reached the media. Bloggers were picking it up. News anchors were asking tough questions. Within the hour, the airline released a statement saying they were reviewing the incident. But that wasn't enough for David. Because for him, this wasn't just about a seat. It was about respect, dignity, and making sure no one else had to experience what he just did. Later that day, David's company suspended all cybersecurity services to the airline, pending the results of their internal investigation. The airline's security systems, firewalls, and even flight schedule protections were now at risk, all because they disrespected the wrong passenger. And here's the twist. That flight crew, the two attendants, and the gate agent involved in the incident, they were all quietly let go within 48 hours. David didn't have to demand it. The company knew it was the only way to save face. By the time David Lawson got into his car and left the airport, his name had already started trending online, and he didn't even post a thing. The 42-second video, taken by a fellow first-class passenger, showing David being calmly removed from his rightful seat, had now been shared over 600,000 times in under 2 hours. And people weren't just watching. They were angry. Thousands of comments flooded in. He was quiet, respectful, showed his ticket, and still got removed? What more proof do they need? This is what black professionals deal with every day. Doesn't matter how successful you are, they still see you as a threat. Tag Delta. Don't let this slide. Hashtag flying while black. The hashtag first class while black quickly became a #1 trend on Twitter, X, followed by hashtag respect black excellence. News outlets jumped in. Blogs started running the story under headlines like, "Small Blue Diamond CEO denied seat despite first-class ticket. Racial bias alleged." "Small Blue Diamond, Delta under fire after viral video of black executive being escorted off plane." "Small Blue Diamond man quietly leaves plane, then grounds the flight crew with one phone call." But what stunned everyone the most was when celebrities started sharing the story. Famous entrepreneur and investor Damon John tweeted, "I don't know David Lawson personally, but I know his type. Calm, focused, and 10 steps ahead. That airline just made a very expensive mistake." TV host Trevor Noah reposted the clip, adding, "Respect is not something you earn only when people recognize your status. It should be the default. Period." Even Oprah's own network reshared the story with a caption. It's not just about flying first class. It's about being seen, being treated like you belong. By midday, Delta Airlines' PR team was buried under a mountain of damage control. They issued a second statement, this time apologizing directly to David Lawson, calling it an unfortunate misunderstanding, promising to investigate the behavior of the staff involved. But by then, the internet wasn't interested in apologies. Back at David's office in Manhattan, his executive assistant, Sarah, walked into his glass-walled corner suite with a stunned look on her face. "David," she said, holding her phone. "You're trending." David chuckled softly. "What for this time?" She turned her screen toward him. "You went viral. The video from a flight. Celebrities are posting it. News anchors are reaching out. It's blowing up." David leaned back in his chair, exhaled slowly, and looked out the window. He didn't smile. He wasn't surprised. "This was never about me," he said. "It's about how many people this happens to, who don't have a platform or power." Sarah nodded. "People are calling you a hero." David shook his head. "No, I'm just visible." Meanwhile, on the airline's internal Slack channels and employee forums, the conversation was different. Flight attendants were whispering that training manuals were being updated overnight. Gate agents were being told to triple verify boarding conflicts, especially if a complaint about discrimination was involved. Privately, 3 employees were suspended without pay, pending a review. But David didn't want revenge. He wanted accountability and change. So he crafted a powerful open letter, not out of anger, but out of leadership. It read, "I don't want your seat. I want your awareness. What happened to me was not unique. It's just at this time, someone was watching. You can apologize to me, but you need to protect the people who don't have my network, my company, or my legal team. I urge every airline, every company, every public-facing brand, review how you treat people who don't look the part, because they do belong. And next time, they might be the CEO too." He ended the letter with a phrase that resonated across platforms. Success shouldn't have to be your armor. Humanity should be your shield. The letter was reposted millions of times, included in TED Talk discussions, and featured in college diversity training programs. Even civil rights organizations reached out to David, asking him to speak at forums and business events. What started as a moment of disrespect was now a global conversation. And David? He hadn't even raised his voice. The next morning, the boardroom at Delta Airlines was silent. Executives sat with furrowed brows, scrolling through an endless stream of articles, retweets, and angry customer emails. Their brand was now at the center of a national controversy, and their previous statements had done little to calm the storm. By 9 a.m., 3 major corporate clients had called to discuss their continued partnerships. Stock prices had started dipping. One headline read, "Airline buys costs millions in a day. When will they learn?" The CEO of the airline, who had flown in from Atlanta overnight, called an emergency press conference. Dressed in a dark suit, looking visibly uncomfortable, he read a carefully worded apology. "We want to express our deepest regret for the incident involving Mr. David Lawson. We are conducting a full investigation, and the employees involved have been placed on administrative leave. We recognize that we must do better, and we are committed to making long-term changes to ensure this never happens again." Reporters weren't impressed. The public wasn't buying it. And David? He remained silent. People kept waiting for him to lash out online or threaten legal action. But instead, he did something more powerful. He declined an interview with every major network, and instead released a short video on his company's official page. It was just him in a plain office sitting behind a desk. "No dramatics," he said calmly. "No lawsuits. No loud statements. I just want to speak from the heart." He explained what had happened, not with anger, but with clarity. How he was questioned, dismissed, and ultimately replaced in the seat he had paid for, simply because he didn't look the part. He said, "I didn't walk off that plane for revenge. I walked off because it was never about the seat. It was about the message being sent to every young black kid who dreams big." He then dropped the mic in the most unexpected way. He announced that his company would be launching a $5 million initiative called Seats for All, a program aimed at funding training in unconscious bias for airline staff, hospitality workers, and frontline service professionals across the country. But he didn't stop there. He also pledged to fund scholarships for students of color pursuing careers in aviation and aerospace. The impact was immediate. Media outlets changed their headlines from "CEO denied seat" to "CEO turns insult into opportunity." Influencers praised him not just for standing up, but for lifting others while doing it. He became a trending name not because of outrage, but because of how he turned hurt into hope. But for the airline, it was too little, too late. Their inboxes flooded with customers canceling memberships. Travel blogs began listing alternatives, and activists launched a boycott campaign. Other CEOs quietly distanced themselves. The airline's executive team requested a private meeting with David, hoping to negotiate a statement of resolution, maybe even get his company to resume services. David agreed to the meeting, but when he walked in, he wasn't alone. He brought in 2 young black pilots, a flight attendant, and an aerospace engineering student. He told the boardroom, "If you're serious about change, don't talk to me. Talk to them. Invest in their future, not just your damage control." That moment became iconic. It was clipped, shared, and quoted in magazines and morning shows. A moment of grace, power, and leadership, without yelling, without threats. Just truth, spoken plainly. The airline agreed to fund the Seats for All initiative and implement a revised nationwide training program developed by David's team. But the flight crew from that day, they were quietly terminated, not as a punishment, but because, as the internal report said, they failed to reflect the values our airline claims to uphold. The scandal eventually passed. The hashtags faded. But something had changed. People began speaking up more. Airports started listening more. Months had passed since that flight. It wasn't because someone made what happened didn't fade. It was because someone made a started as a quiet act of dignity on a plane became a story told in classrooms, in corporate boardrooms, and around dinner tables. Not because of outrage, but because of grace. David Lawson didn't ask for attention. He didn't chase headlines. He simply refused to stay silent when silence meant surrender. His company had returned to full operation, stronger than ever. Requests for speaking engagements poured in from universities, Fortune 500 companies, and global conferences. But David said no to most. He chose to focus on what mattered most to him, building systems that opened doors for those who'd always been told to wait outside. One morning, he visited a youth aviation camp funded through the Seats for All initiative. A group of young black teens gathered around a simulator, laughing, testing, learning. One of them, a boy no older than 13, looked up and said, "Mr. Lawson, I saw your video. You didn't yell. You didn't fight. You just walked off." "Why?" David smiled and said, "Because sometimes silence is louder than noise. And walking away with dignity speaks louder than shouting in anger." That moment became more powerful than any press conference. Meanwhile, the airline, still recovering from its PR nightmare, implemented sweeping reforms. Their policies were rewritten, staff retrained, executive bonuses were quietly paused. But more importantly, leadership roles were open to more diverse candidates. Gate agents and flight attendants were now evaluated not just on efficiency, but on how they made passengers feel. And yes, some of those new hires were graduates from programs funded by David's initiative. But none of this would have happened if David had just sat down and accepted it, if he'd shrugged it off as just another day. What made the world listen wasn't the injustice itself. It was how he responded to it. Not with anger, not with chaos, but with clarity, vision, and action. That's what made the difference. One night, while giving a quiet interview to a small podcast, David was asked, "Do you feel like you won?" He paused, then said, "This wasn't a win or lose moment. It was a wake-up call, not just for the airline, for everyone. Because if someone with my resume, my track record, and my presence can still be told, that seat's not for people like you, imagine what happens to those without any platform at all." His words hit deep. And here's what makes this story unforgettable. David didn't just make a change in that moment. He built a bridge for others to cross. Every young person who watched that story unfold now sees someone who looked like them, acted with wisdom, and still made an impact. No shouting, no drama, just undeniable truth. So we ask you this: what would you have done if you had a first-class ticket in your hand and were told that seat's not for people like you? Would you argue? Would you back down? Or would you flip the script like David did? Because this wasn't just about a seat. It was about being seen, being respected, and most of all, being heard even in silence. This is Moral Mirror, where every story reflects the truth that lives inside all of us. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you stop and think, don't just scroll past. Hit that like button. Subscribe to Moral Mirror for more real-life stories that challenge your heart and open your eyes. And drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were David? We want to hear your truth. Until next time, remember this: your dignity is louder than their doubt. And your presence in a room might just be the story that changes everything. This is Moral Mirror, and this story, you won't forget it.